Glad to have you watch AAU Talks again on AAU TV, the voice of higher education in Africa. My name is Ajiman Ochudako, and always we are dedicated and motivated to bring you content that transform. As the voice of higher education in Africa, my name is Ajiman Ochudako. And today I'm joined in the studio with a very, I would say he's an African rep and also a very distinguished figure in the field of communication, also a vice chancellor who will be helping us discuss thoroughly how we can enhance journalism education in Africa. But today, the media space is gaining so much traction. So many people are now gaining access. We have a democratized access when it comes to journalism because of social media and all of these platforms. And there's a need for us to streamline journalism in Africa to be more responsive, more professional, and more standard. So we'll go for a quick break. When we come back, I'll let you know who he is, and as usual, we zoom to discussions about how we can enhance journalism education in Africa. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. You're welcome back to AAU Talks on AAU TV, the voice of higher education in Africa. My name is Ajiman Ochudako. Before we went on a break, we're talking about enhancing journalism education in Africa. And today, joining me in the studio to discuss this topic is not only the Vice Chancellor for the Federal University of Kashere, he's also the Director representing Africa on the Global Network of UNESCO Communication Professors, and in the person of Professor Umaru A. Pate. Prof, you're welcome to AAU Talks.
Thank you very much, Ajiman.
It's an honor having you spend time with us in the studio today to discuss a very pertinent matter on journalism in Africa today. The terrain is open, the technology is disruptive, and now we need to keep an eye on it, streamline activities, and ensure that we have best value and best practices all through journalism. So let's begin with your steps and your milestone as a communications expert into media studies, and also with the academic background in communication. How has it been thus far?
Thank you very much. I am glad to be in your studios, and I'm also impressed with what I have seen. I think this is a very positive and a very remarkable step for AAU, which is in the forefront of bringing universities in Africa together, as well as linking us to other parts of the globe. I hope this platform will be given a boost, and one day we shall have our Education Africa television, of course with the headquarters here in your studios, so that the entire education community in Africa will have a strong voice that could feature on the global map. And there could be inputs from every part of Africa, and every university can have a voice here. Now, going back to your question, well, the latest assignment I think I could refer to, which I did in Nigeria, was to lead the process of reviewing the national communication and media studies curriculum in the country.
Okay.
It took us about 2-3 years doing that. We've completely reviewed and unbundled the mass communication program and generally media and communication studies program in the country. That has been approved by the government, and hopefully this year universities will be required to start implementing the new program. And why did we do so? We did that to respond to emerging challenges globally, as well as ensure that the next generation of journalists trained in Nigerian universities can fit into the modern trend, as well as be able to address contemporary realities, challenges, and gaps which perhaps our old curriculum couldn't sufficiently do.
Yeah.
Not only that, to prepare our students also to be able to sufficiently and capably be able to study in universities in other parts of the world for their postgraduate studies, so that we do not train students who may be required, for example, to go and take deficiency courses, or students who may find it difficult to cope with postgraduate studies elsewhere. So we have tried as much as possible to align our own content also with contents and realities that other universities outside Africa are also offering. And you see, the second reason, or the third reason I may advance, is that with the advent of the internet and the revolution in communication technologies, information and communication technologies, the practice of journalism has completely changed because of the opportunities offered by the internet, as well as the new advantages brought by these technologies. However, there are also numerous challenges that have come with these limited opportunities. And these challenges are challenges that we either address or they consume us. And so instead of sitting down lamenting, we have taken steps, at least from the perspective of training, to see that our students are sufficiently equipped so that by the time they go into the industry, they will be able to fit in. That is, we are talking about employability, and also be able to be on their own in terms of entrepreneurial journalism, so that they could also operate in the industry without necessarily depending on others for employment. But then, that is also not enough. Now, almost everything about journalism is changing. And the changes, like I've said, have come with their own problems. One, issue of funding.
Yeah.
Every media organization, not only in Africa, globally, are battling with issues of funding now. Advertising revenue is drastically and dangerously declining. Sponsors are no longer as they used to be. And the little revenue that they could get from their governments are no longer coming. That is for government media organizations, because of the competing demands on government. So the only alternative is the advert revenue. And the advert revenue, like I've told you, are now mostly controlled by the big global tech companies, Amazon, Google, and all of that. Because attention is moving to digital communication on the social media platforms. So the conventional media, with all their investments and the effort they put in to produce programs, to produce newspapers, they put them on these platforms. And when they put them on these platforms now act as distributors, giving people to read. And advertisers go to them. Advertisers no longer come to the traditional media as we know them. So while these guys are working hard to produce content and put them online, the big money eventually goes to those that did not produce. But the distributors. This is one dimension to it. Then the second aspect of it is that now younger people mostly are glued to these
social
big
media, distribution channels.
If you are to do a survey, for example, on the average age of a typical radio listener in Ghana or Nigeria today, you'll be shocked. It may be around 50. Number two, or the next one, even TV is similar. But what's affected are the newspapers and magazines. The reading habit of our younger people is so discouraging. People no longer buy newspapers or magazines. And even those that read, they do so on these platforms. So what happens to the newspapers? What happens to the magazines? You could see that their circulations have gone very low. Their advert revenues very, very low. So many of them are in crisis. They can't pay salaries, they can't pay this, they can't pay that. Our radio stations, slightly better maybe. TV stations also. But everything is moving towards online. So if you are not there, you will be in business. So how do we now, from the perspective of the universities, respond to this particular challenge? Our new curriculum, for example, in Nigeria, has attempted addressing that by introducing courses relating to media economics and management, for example, entrepreneurial journalism, so that we could teach our next generation of journalists ways of raising revenue. It's not enough to train a professional who could write, good editor, but with poor knowledge of economics on how the media can survive. And the challenge is really threatening.
Yeah.
Existentially threatening to the media industry. Now, closely related to issue of funding is the issue of technology. In terms of technology, like I've told you, with the advent of the internet, the revolution in communication technologies, a lot of investment is required for any media to compete and command attention as required. And not many of our entrepreneurs in Africa, or particularly our governments, because in Africa we have many government media organizations, they have not been sufficiently able to invest and go and obtain these technologies.
Yes.
We have to import these technologies.
Yeah.
And because they are not able to do that, the big companies outside Nigeria or the big organizations outside Nigeria with their commanding resources are now hugely investing, and because of that, the attention of our people are moving towards their direction, with huge disadvantages to us here. And some of the disadvantages include inability of our media organizations to focus on local issues. They are now, in attempt to survive, aligning with the big companies, and then we are more informed, for example, internationally than in your own world. Now, it has also given advantage to the rise of new entrants that have no business in journalism. Because the computer now manipulates to gather data and direct how and what kind of information you receive, you could see that there are people who have no business in journalism, yet they are the people determining the kind of content that others could get. We have this huge challenge. Then the rise of those who refer to as citizen journalists. Yes, there are some good ones among them, but there are also a lot of quacks masquerading as professional journalists. At the end of the day, what do you have? Everyone has become a journalist. You have an individual becoming his own reporter, his own editor, his own distributor, because of the opportunity provided by the internet, which has democratized access and distribution. With cheap data, you can distribute to limitless number of WhatsApp groups. And it is a distribution of information. The consequence is a decline in credibility of the media itself. Because a lot of lies, a lot of disinformation, misinformation, malinformation, hate speech are freely distributed with the collapse of gatekeeping system in these social media organizations. And many of our young people are hooked onto them. And these young people do not have the advantage of the knowledge of history of their nations or of their own peoples or even environment. Many of them do not even know geography of their areas. So they depend on these sources to be informed about the realities in their own countries. And you have so many mischief makers all over the place. People who try to rewrite history, people who try to tell lies, either in Africa, in our individual countries, or outside. And the huge disadvantage or the huge damage this is doing to our nations is enormous. If you take Nigeria, for example, our country is multicultural, highly diverse, with all sorts of complexities and pluralistic outlooks. And here you have people who come with information that sometimes they ethnicize, they religionize, they politicize, or even provincialize to cause confusion among the people. And you could see the consequences all over the place, how hate speech is fueling ethnic and religious conflicts in our country and several other countries. Already we have been battling with poverty, we have been battling with politics of demonization, And now the social media is coming to compound the situation for which we are not prepared fully to address. And you could see the consequences all over the place. Now, another dimension to this is the issue of competence. How competent are our people in terms of being able to package these contents and relate to our citizens? It's very difficult.
Yeah.
It means we have to invest in human capital. Not only invest in human capital, we must also invest in material capital, the technologies. The resources are simply not available. So the consequence is our people are now captured by the global tech companies. Number two, the real information that will facilitate the process of development, cohesion, unity are undermined and subverted in the name of pluralism, in the name of democratization to access. So many of our people are confused. So in the universities, we have a responsibility. As you could see, as these technologies are evolving, we have not been able to sufficiently come up with governing regimes. We are busy learning how to live with these technologies without necessarily designing ways on how we can govern these technologies. And they have taken over our lives.
Yeah.
But we are not able to come up with policies or regulatory mechanisms on how we could be in control. And the media is one of these instruments. So in the universities, we have a very huge responsibility to train professionals who could understand the complexities of these new realities. Complexities coming from technology. And if you look at also the amount of pressure these sources of information are putting on our young people who are coming up, and the consequences on their understanding of their own realities and their perceptions, and the kind of stereotyping that these things are creating on their minds. So how do we train journalists who understand this kind of realities? Number two, how do you train journalists that could master these technologies and be able to deploy them effectively to inform our citizens?
Great.
Number three, how do you train journalists that can be trusted in the era of post-truth, in the era of disinformation, in the era of hate speech, when the media, as we know them, are being undermined dangerously daily by the social media and all these alternative sources of information that sometimes come from mischief makers, come from sources that you don't even know in and out of your environment without you being able to have a hand either in saying how, what and what, or to filter, or even to exercise the normal journalistic activity of gatekeeping. So what kind of journalists can you train who can win the confidence of the people? Then the issue of press freedom and safety of journalists. Daily, journalists are being attacked, killed, all over the place.
Yeah.
Media freedom is also being attacked all over the place, either explicitly or implicitly. Now, for the journalists, you don't expect me to train a professional, graduate him. He is employed by a media organization only to be killed in the course of his responsibility, in the course of undertaking his duty. And you see, for journalists to command respect these days, they have to engage in aspects of investigative journalism, which is very dangerous and risky. But that is where the media can set the agenda and win the confidence of the people.
Yes.
But if we train them on how to engage in investigative journalism, and they start undertaking their duties only to be killed by other enemies of the state, or by some form of compromise, or by some gangs or some criminals. And it's happening. You could see every year. If you take the statistics coming from UNESCO or some other organizations as of today, you will see the number of journalists that have been killed. Either by, like for example, if you take Mexico, by drunk gangs. If you go to Somalia, by militants.
Terrorists, yeah.
If you come to even Nigeria, you have corrupt elements who try to compromise journalists. And where they don't kill, they ensure that you are subdued in several ways. So how do we equip our journalists to overcome psychological, or to be sure that they are psychologically safe, away from fear, to be free from fear? How do we ensure that they are physically safe? And importantly, how do we ensure that they are economically safe?
Yeah.
Because there will be no point to train journalists. They are employed and they are not being paid their salaries. Or where they are being paid, they are given very miserable and wretched pays.
Yeah, sure.
Then how do we ensure that they are also gender safe? Gender safety is important for us, particularly for our female colleagues. Then issue of online safety. Many of our journalists are bullied online, especially for those who are on online platforms. They are terrorized. Then issue of social safety, political safety, legal safety. People threaten you, they will take you to court, they will do this, they will do that, just to harass you, so that you are subdued. And then the quality of what you do is compromised. So these are challenges we have taken note of, and we have tried to incorporate into our new curriculum in Nigeria to ensure that the journalists we are going to train will be economically active and independent if possible. Because as we always say, economic independence determines editorial independence in the media. Where the media is not economically independent, it will be difficult for its own content to also be editorially independent. So we have to train journalists that can manage media organizations to profitability and manage them as businesses, which means journalism training must incorporate aspects of economics, aspects of management. We are doing that, or we have started doing that. Then we have to train them to be safe. Then we have to train them to understand the psychology of the audiences now, so that the contents that will be produced will be equal to what the audience will require. Like I've told you, with the new reality now, people have access to limitless channels of information.
Sure.
In other words, you have abundance of channels with little attention available. So how do you get from the little attention available of the consumers, how can you get a portion of it?
I think whilst we think through that, on that, we'll come back after this short break and talk more about the ways and means we are trying to streamline journalism education in Africa with Professor Umaru A. Pate. Stay with us, we'll be right back. So we're right back on AAU Talks to the short break. And you know, Professor Umaru mentioned a couple of challenges that are facing the journalism industry with journalists who are graduates who are entering the industry. And these issues are very pertinent. He mentioned the fact that journalists must be trained to understand the discipline, must be trained to have the right skills to operate, must be trained to be able to bear the integrity, to stand by it, the peace, the security of journalism, of journalists in the continent, a whole lot that he mentioned, and also the economic soundness of these journalists as well. And Prof, let's go back to how we can address these. We want to train journalists to understand the discipline. Today, you're aware that the disruptive technology, social media, has brought a whole new, unconventional way of journalism, where people can now have diversified mainstream journalism to something else, and you are not really happy about the fact that it opens more room for the quacks and also for wannabes.
Well, but this is the reality, and there's a limit to what I can do as an individual or even as a professional, because these are global evolutions. People are still trying to understand these evolutions. We are still in a form of a dazed kind of situation, and perhaps at a later time, we will all be stabilized and then now chart a way forward. But for now, there is some element of confusion and uncertainty. So that does not mean that we should fold our hands and just allow things to go. So how do we respond to these evolving situations? How do we train people who can understand these realities and make sense and then forge on? Now, let's go back a little into history. In the beginning, it was just the oral word, not even the written one. Then the written one came. Then a printing press, Gutenberg, was discovered. Then newspapers started courtesy of the discovery of the printing press. Later, radio came, film came, television came, and each time a new medium of communication emerges, you realize that it is courtesy of a new technology. And there could be some element of uncertainty in the minds of people. When the radio came, no, newspaper is going to die. Newspaper didn't die. When film, TV came, people, no, now radio and newspaper will die. The two didn't die. TV came. And TV too evolved over time from black and white, blah, blah, even radio from radio diffusion and blah, blah, blah. Then now we have reached the age of convergence, where both radio, TV, film, newspapers are on one platform. And people are saying, oh, newspapers will die, radio will die. They are still struggling to survive. So we are hoping that with time, these technologies will stabilize and people will be in a better position to understand many things. And again, like I've told you, these days, the consumer now decides what he wants, unlike before, where you tune to a radio and then what you hear on the radio is what is available. But now you can decide, what is it that I want to listen?
You can explore.
And at what point in time? With your social media, all these things are there. So you see, you are in control of even what you can hear. So the media organization must respond to that. So it's a whole lot of confusion. Even governments are not able, up to now, to come up with policies, like I've told you, to govern some of these things. They are still confused.
But Prof, would you not bear in that it is a good thing that today the consumer has choice?
It is good.
What they
It is good. I told you, these things have come with limitless opportunities. They have also created numerous problems.
Okay.
So we are still struggling to understand these problems before the problems consume us. We're still struggling to do that. Like fake news, for example, hate speech. These things have always been with us. People have been telling lies time immemorial. But because there was no internet and the media organizations had some elements of control in gatekeeping, they were not as prevalent as we are seeing today. So today, with the advent of the internet, information dissemination has become very easy. And not very easy, but things can go viral globally.
Tremendously.
And because of that, one small lie here could easily become an international, a global lie within a minute. And it may not even appear like a lie. People are so sophisticated in packaging some of this information that it becomes difficult for not so much a schooled mind to understand these things. So for you to be able to understand, you have to be so sophisticated as well. And we do not have that luxury in Africa. So the problems are many. But like I've said, we must also respond, even if not at the speed at which these technologies are emerging. Because the speed is so dizzying and light that you can't even, before you understand it, a new one has come, before another one has come. And younger people are following up. But all the same, for us from the journalism perspective, it's not going to be a one-way thing. It has to come from different, the approaches must be multiple, from different sources. So from us as trainers of journalists, we have to be sure that first, we train people who are capable of serving the current crop of people by understanding their needs. And then the industries also. If you go to the industry, some of the companies and some of the media organizations are able to come up with new equipment also.
Okay.
Now, if you train a journalist who is an analog, who do not have the capacity to master this technology, by the time they go to the industry, they become irrelevant. So we have to be sure that ideally the classroom should be ahead of the industry or the newsroom. But because of the problems we have in our systems, many of our universities find it difficult to acquire this equipment. So, but we are struggling to do that, so that at least our students can be trained on the kind of equipment that they are likely to find in the industry. We are doing that. Like I've told you also, the dimension of media economics, and then entrepreneurial journalism.
Yeah.
Unemployment is a problem across Africa. So we have to train younger people that can also be independently employed, or they can employ themselves using their skills in journalism to remain afloat. So all these things, like I've said, they have to understand their environment. And most importantly, for countries like us in Nigeria, they have to understand our developmental challenges, our multicultural setting, our diversities, for them to serve this kind of complex environment. You can, if you go to school to reach your journalism, you are not going to serve in an empty environment. You are not going to serve in a vacuum. You are going to serve within a specific context, context with its own realities, with its own geography, history, sociology, anthropological background. So as a journalist, what is your own knowledge of these historical, geographical, sociological realities of the environment, so that you serve and ensure cohesion instead of serving to damage? And you could see many of our journalists, sometimes when you read their write-ups, you could see a clear reflection of poverty of knowledge, penury of idea, and total disregard to anything called culture or sacred idea in such communities. When you hear them on radio, you could hear blatant lies being distributed, bereft of any historical information. And these are the kind of journalists who cause more confusion than causing progress in society. And now with politics, and the kind of politics we practice in Africa, where a lot of politics go about without ethics. So what do you have? You have propagandists being hired or turning themselves into professional journalists.
Yes.
At the end of the day, they find it difficult to draw a line between the propaganda element and the professional element of journalism.
And this is quite...
And you have it all over the place.
This is quite inevitable. Today, it's hard to separate the political aspect.
This is because you have so many wrong people being in the system who do not even know the difference between being a professional journalist and being a quack or a professional propagandist. By the time you mix all these things, what do you have? Because you have multiple channels, multiple platforms, that regulation has become also quite difficult.
How about the control of politics? Now, politics, political power and will to manipulate mainstream media also is inevitable.
This relates to the attitude and the ethical dimension of our own politicians and societies.
Absolutely.
When you have this attitude of I must win at all cost without ethical consideration, then what do you have? People can use anything, can say anything, especially when they know there will be no consequences. Then they go ahead doing it. And then they disregard anything called values. They disregard anything just in the pursuit of naked power. And you have plenty of it in Africa. Even the Europeans that we are talking about, or the Western world, for example, they still practice some element of ethics in their political activities. You could sometimes see. Look at what happened in Britain recently. Boris was removed from office, particularly or mostly focusing on his behavior. I think it will be difficult finding it in Africa, where people steal money and still remain in office.
Resign.
In fact, the next day you see them campaigning again to occupy offices.
Yeah.
So you see, these are things that, like I've told you, will not only come from journalism. We have our own limitations.
Yeah.
But other sectors in society, like the political class, for example, must also behave and enforce some of these our values, either cultural values, the normal ethical values, and then our own even constitutional requirements. But these things,
Prof,
yes.
do you see a change now?
Well, I am
how far we've gone.
I am an optimist. I'm an optimist. I train young people. And I train young people always emphasizing optimism. Let us not become totally hopeless. Let us not always appear so pessimistic. Yes, there are challenges. Let us understand what these challenges are. And then be courageous enough to continue to do the little we could, so that perhaps one day, it may not be during my generation, it could be subsequent generation, but my duty is to train young people who could keep the system, the system going and continuously refine the system. So I will never ever be hopeless. I will continue to preach liberalism, promote democratic spirit within the African context, and encourage us to be courageous enough to stick to our values, to stick to ethics. And if the politicians could do that, I assure you every other person in Africa will do that, because they are the leaders. Don't forget, in every context we have about 5 or 6 different groups of elites. The political elite, the intellectual elite, the bureaucratic elite, military elite, business elites. And of all these elite groupings, the political elite is the coordinator as well as the leader of the other elite groups. So if he behaves well and is willing to insist on rules and be able to sacrifice, the system will move. But once he misbehaves or his attitude does not connote confidence or competence, then what do you have? He won't have the moral ability to punish and enforce existing rules. So everything will just go haywire. And at the end of the day, the society will suffer for it. And this is what we are experiencing in many parts of Africa.
Prof, counting on our predicaments today, if you were to outline some very, very important fundamentals that we shouldn't let go on how we can develop responsive journalists in Africa for the next decades, what would be these values that we shouldn't trample upon?
Well, for me, I'm going to talk from my perspective as a teacher, which I've been engaging for quite a while. For you to train a journalist, he must have a broad mind. He must have a very broad understanding of the issues at stake both locally and internationally, and also appreciate the context of his own environment. Realize that, look, if you are to practice journalism of destruction in Ghana, there will be a day when there will be no Ghana. So why will you practice your journalism? So you have to practice for the country to survive first. Then what do you think do we need to do to ensure we have a system, not personalities? A system can endure. A personality can die tomorrow. If you are promoting only personalities in the news, in your country and all of that, and they misbehave, you protect them. Now, by the time they are aware, what happens? You did not build a system. But if you build an enduring system, whoever that is there, he must work within the context of the system. And the system can easily flush him out. And it is the responsibility of the journalists to ensure that we help to build systems for our nations by ensuring that we behave well as well. If, as a journalist, you are referred to as a watchdog, and here you are full of corruption, or you are somebody that can easily be tempted, it means you will become a lame dog instead of being a watchdog. And if you are a lame dog, it means you have 3 legs instead of 4, or 2 legs instead of 2. It means you cannot watch anything. You cannot bark. You cannot bite. So for you to be able to do that, you must be independent. You must have the moral guts to look at us in the face. But like I've said again, you cannot only talk of journalists without talking of the other structures. What of our religious community? What of our political community? What of our traditional community? If all of them are not as upright as they should, it will be difficult for the journalists alone. So it has to be a collective kind of thing. We should all agree that, look, we want a complete change for us to behave along certain lines. Fight corruption, for example. If you take a country like Nigeria, our own challenges are very clear. We have to accept the reality of multiculturalism. We have to fight corruption. We have to fight insecurity. We have to agree that this nation should remain, and then we do certain things. But so long as we do not even agree on this, it will be difficult. We'll be working at cross purposes. And nobody will have the ability to look at the other person and tell him, behave well. So our journalists, so long as we will insist that they do right, but we must also plead with the other groups or the other sectors to do well as well. So that at the end of the day, it becomes a collective thing. But definitely, as we are talking now, journalism is in crisis.
Yeah.
Not only in Nigeria or in Ghana, but globally.
Sure.
Courtesy of the new technologies, the advent of the internet, and if you come to Africa, our own internal domestic challenges that have compounded the problem that we have. And the new reality caused by this journalism that we are seeing today, what are the fallouts? Fake news, hate speech, disinformation, misinformation, and all of declining productivity.
Lots of infodemics.
A lot of it. So at the end of the day, our people are so confused and uncertain. That is why we need governments that have focus, governments that understand these realities and will be willing to work with our educational institutions, will be willing to work our religious leaders, will be willing to work with our business communities, who are the producers of wealth, so that we could defeat poverty. And of course, ensure that we have security for people to even survive. But without all of these things, we shall continue to witness migrations, frustrations, deepening poverty, increment in population without any productivity. And then the African story will always appear negative on CNN, on BBC, and it will continue to be a story of dimming hope. We pray it will not be so. We pray that our educational institutions and platforms like the AAU will work hard to come up with ideas, fantastic ideas that will completely change our narratives and scenarios in Africa in the next few years.
It is very, very, very important and very imperative that we generate encircling ideas to ensure that we transform journalism in the African continent. Journalism which is professional, responsive, ethical, and well structured. It's a very nice moment to have you here, Professor Umaru Pate, for your time and also for your insight you shared with us on how to build the journalism we want in Africa, which is not susceptible to corruption or, let's say, diversion or perversion, but also very, very focused to producing the right kind of content for the African continent and building a name for ourselves over there. Thank you so much for your time on AAU Talks.
Thank you also for hosting me. I'm grateful. And above all, we thank our audience for their kind attention.
Thank you so much for your time as well. And we believe that we'll find an Africa where journalism has a good foundation to stand on with the right ethics, right values, and right accolades when it comes to professionalism and skills of doing things, not leaving along integrity in dispensing our duty. So have a nice day, be safe, and catch us another time on AAU Talks. My name is Umaru A. Bye.